Through the ages, the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft has been viewed as works of cosmic horror fiction that would only come to fame and notoriety after the author would come to die in a mental asylum. In the year 2100, the world was unrecognizable from the chaotic and violent past that had plagued humanity for millennia. Nations had united, and wars were a distant memory. Science had advanced to the point where disease and hunger were all but eradicated. It was a utopian society, a true vision of what humanity could be. Yet there were those who refused to forget the past, who understood that the peace they enjoyed was fragile and could be shattered at any moment. One such person was the archaeologist Darian Grayson. Grayson ran a museum that chronicled the chaotic past of humanity, displaying artifacts and relics from its times long ago. It was while excavating an ancient Native American ruin that Grayson made a discovery that would change his life forever. A tablet written in a language he had never seen before. Grayson was a man of many contradictions. He was both fascinated and repelled by the violence and chaos of the past. He had a deep respect for the cultures that had come before, yet he could not help but feel a sense of superiority over them. He was a futurist, always looking to what lay ahead, yet he found himself down to the past, to the secrets that lay buried in the earth. He was a man who lived in two worlds, never fully comfortable in either. But when he discovered the tablet, he knew that his two worlds were about to collide. The tablet spoke of something that he had always believed was nothing more than the mad ramblings and storytelling of H.P. Lovecraft, the great old ones. And as he delved deeper into the tablet's mysteries, he began to wonder if Lovecraft had been right all along, that the ancient beings had telepathically relayed their existence to the author so many years ago. Grayson knew that he had to find out the truth, even if it meant risking everything he held dear. The ancient Native American ruin that Darian Grayson was excavating was situated in the heart of what was once been the great ancestral Puebloan civilization in what is now known as the southwestern United States. The site was located in a remote canyon surrounded by red sandstone cliffs that rose up into the desert sky. The ruins themselves were a testament to the ingenuity and skill of the people who had built and inhabited them. The ruin consisted of several multi-story buildings made of sandstone blocks, the walls adorned with intricate carvings and paintings. The buildings were arranged around a central plaza, which was surrounded by smaller rooms and storage areas. The rooms themselves were surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings and windows that allowed for natural light to pour in. Grayson marveled at the complexity of the engineering that had gone into construction of the buildings, with wooden beams supporting the roofs and carefully crafted staircases connecting the different levels. The people who had built and inhabited the ruin were the ancestral Puebloans, a civilization that had thrived in the southwestern United States from around 200 AD into the late 1300s. They were a highly organized and sophisticated society with a deep understanding of agriculture and the ability to sustain large populations in an arid environment. They were skilled in pottery making, basket weaving, and the creation of intricate jewelry. The ancestral Puebloans were deeply spiritual people with a complex belief system that centered around the cycles of the sun and the seasons. Grayson felt a deep sense of awe and respect for the people who had built the ruin, and he knew that the tablet he had discovered held the key to unlocking even more secrets of their civilization. Darian Grayson's research into the ancestral Puebloan civilization revealed a daily life that was closely tied to their spiritual beliefs. The ancestral Puebloans believed in a cyclical nature of life and death, and saw their existence as being deeply interconnected with the natural world around them. Their spiritual beliefs were based on the cycles of the sun and the seasons, and their daily life was structured around these cycles. For the Puebloans, architecture was a central part of their daily life, and they were experts in dryland farming, using sophisticated irrigation techniques to grow crops such as maize, beans, and squash. The crops they grew were not only essential for their survival, but were also seen as gifts from the gods and were used in ritual offerings and ceremonies. The ancestral Puebloans also had a complex system of social organization, with clans and families living in close-knit communities. Each community had a kiva, a subterranean room used for spiritual ceremonies, and many of the daily activities of the community were centered around the kiva. The spiritual beliefs of the Puebloans also influenced their artistic expressions. They were skilled in pottery making, basket weaving, and the creation of intricate jewelry, which often incorporated symbols and motifs that reflected their spiritual beliefs. Overall, the daily life for the Puebloans was deeply intertwined with their spiritual beliefs, and they saw their existence as part of a larger cosmic cycle. Grayson was struck by the depth of their spiritual beliefs and the sophistication of their society, and he knew that the discovery of the tablet would shed new light on the secrets of their civilization. As Grayson continued his research into the tablet and the Puebloan civilization, he began to uncover evidence that their spiritual beliefs may have been influenced by the ancient beings known as the Great Old Ones. The tablet contained references to these beings, and the symbols and motifs found in their artwork bore a striking resemblance to the descriptions of the Great Old Ones in Lovecraft's stories. Grayson was initially skeptical of these findings, but as he delved deeper into the ancestral Puebloan spiritual beliefs, he began to see a pattern emerging: the cyclical nature of life and death, the emphasis on offerings and ceremonies, and the belief in the cosmic order all seemed to align with the idea of a pantheon of powerful and ancient beings who controlled the fate of the universe. As Grayson continued to investigate, he discovered that the ancestral Puebloans believed that the Great Old Ones had once ruled over the earth, but had been banished to another realm by the gods. They believed that the Great Old Ones still had the power to influence the world, and that their return would bring about a new era of chaos and destruction. Grayson was fascinated by these revelations and began to see the ancestral Puebloan spiritual beliefs in a new light. He realized that their art, their ceremonies, and their way of life were all deeply connected to the mythos of the Great Old Ones, and that their civilization may have been shaped by these ancient beings in ways that were only now being uncovered. As Grayson delved deeper into the ancestral Puebloan civilization, he began to uncover evidence that suggested the existence of an ancient cult that still adhered to the beliefs of the Great Old Ones. He found references to secret ceremonies and rituals that were believed to invoke the power of these beings, and evidence that the cult had survived into modern times. Grayson knew that if he could track down this cult and could make contact, he might be able to uncover the truth behind their ancient practices and how they had influenced the world's history. He began to study the symbols and the motifs found in their artwork, searching for any clues that might lead him to their hidden location. Finally, after months of research, Grayson discovered a series of cryptic symbols that seemed to point towards a remote region of the world, far from civilization. He knew that he had to go there and investigate for himself. Grayson set out on his journey, traveling to the far reaches of the world in search of the cult of the Great Old Ones. When he arrived at his destination, he found a hidden temple that had been constructed by the cult in ancient times. Inside, he discovered a group of people who still adhered to the ancient beliefs of the Great Old Ones. At first, the cultists were wary of Grayson, but he was eventually able to gain their trust and make contact. He discovered that the cult had been using the ancient magic of the Great Old Ones to unify the world and establish world peace, but at a great and evil cost. Grayson realized that the cult was using sacrifices and other dark rituals to maintain their hold on the world, and that their methods were both horrible and unsustainable. He knew that he had to put a stop to their practices, but also recognized the significance of their discovery. The ancient belief of the Great Old Ones had influenced the world's history in ways that he could never have imagined, and the truth behind their practices was both shocking and terrifying. As Grayson delves deeper into the cult's beliefs and practices, he begins to uncover a dark truth about the utopian society he once thought was perfect. He discovers that the magic of the cult is not benevolent, but in fact it drives its followers to a collective madness that inspires a false sense of peace and unity. Grayson discovers that the cult's magic is a potent mix of ancient knowledge and dark rituals that have been passed down for generations. The spells they use are designed to amplify emotions and induce a sense of euphoria in those who practice them. However, as Grayson delves deeper into the cult's secrets, he discovers that the magic also has a terrible cost. He uncovers that the utopian society that the cult has helped establish was not built on true peace and unity, but the collective madness that their magic inspired. Grayson discovers that the people living in this society are not truly happy and fulfilled, but rather living in a state of delusion that masks the underlying madness that is consuming them all. Grayson continues his investigation into the cult's practices and stumbles upon the story of an ancient artifact that provides him with a terrifying glimpse into the reality of the utopian society. After deciphering the original tablet, tying together the clues, Grayson becomes obsessed with finding the underground Cyclopean city mentioned in the ancient text. He studies maps, digs through archives, and consults with fellow archaeologists to try to pinpoint the location of the city. Eventually, Grayson receives a tip from an elderly Native American man who claims to have knowledge of the city's whereabouts. The man explains that his ancestors passed down stories of the city and its connection to the Great Old Ones, warning of the dangers that lurk within. Despite the warning, Grayson is determined to uncover the truth and follows the man's directions to a remote region in the desert. After days of trekking through the unforgiving terrain, Grayson finally reaches the entrance to the city. He was surprised by the presence of a hand-carved rectangular passageway that showed signs of ancient metal hinges once lining the left-hand side of the entrance. He was also surprised that aside from the entrance itself, there was no sign of civilization or habitation in the immediate area, unlike the cliff-carved dwellings of the Native Americans that he so carefully studied. He had with him the very best in modern technology, a gravity generator which powered his electric torch and provided a charge for a small metallic cylinder that emitted a variable powered laser capable of excavation and self-defense if needed. The generator, only the size of a deck of cards, also powered a water bladder that could pull moisture from the air and purify it for him to drink. To round out his kit, Grayson brought 2 weeks of food rations, which was only about the size of a chocolate bar, but provided him with the nutrients needed to survive in most conditions through the most extreme levels of exertion. Using this technology, he was able to navigate through a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, all the while avoiding deadly traps and eldritch creatures that guarded the ancient city. As he ventured deeper into the city, the whispers of the Great Old Ones grow louder, and Grayson begins to question his own sanity. As Grayson ventures deeper into the Cyclopean city, he begins to feel a gnawing sense of unease. It is as if the very air around him is thick with malevolence, and he can sense the lurking presence of unspeakable horrors. The buildings around him are of an architecture so ancient and foreign that it defies all known human forms of construction. The structures twist and turn in ways that make no sense, and the angles are all wrong. The streets are empty, and littered with debris that has lain undisturbed for centuries. As Grayson ventures deeper into the underground city, he begins to encounter entities unlike any he has ever seen. These beings are partially human in form, but with grotesque deformities and mutations. Some have multiple arms or legs, others have tentacle-like appendages instead of fingers or hair. Their skin is slick and slimy, and their eyes glow with an otherworldly light. At first, Grayson tries to avoid them, but he soon realizes that they are everywhere, blocking his path and watching his every move. He can hear their guttural whispers and feel the malevolent presence weighing on his mind. Their movements are jerky and unpredictable, making it difficult for him to anticipate their next move. As he creeps past them, Grayson feels the deep sense of revulsion and horror. He knows that these entities are not natural, and that they are likely the result of the ancient cult's dark magic. He wonders what other horrors lie in wait for him in the depths of the underground city, and feels a simultaneously discouragement from the beings as well as a force that is pulling him to the center of the city. As Grayson approaches the central chamber, he feels a growing sense of dread. It is then that he realizes that the partly human entities that he had encountered earlier were not physical beings at all, but rather manifestations of the ancient magic itself. The magic was reaching out to him, attempting to ensnare his mind and bend it to his will. Grayson grits his teeth and presses on, his mind fighting against the assault. He knows that he must reach the chamber at the center of the city if he is to uncover the truth about the artifact and the madness that it has wrought upon the world. Finally, he reaches the chamber, and there he finds the statue that he has been seeking. It's a twisted, monstrous thing, an unholy amalgamation of human and inhuman forms. Its eyes seem to follow him, and Grayson can feel the ancient magic radiating from it in waves. He reaches out to touch it, but as his fingers brush the surface of the statue, he is overcome by a vision of unimaginable horror, and he feels his mind teetering on the brink of madness. The artifact is a small, intricately carved statue made of obsidian, and when Grayson holds it, he experiences a sudden and overwhelming sense of dread. He feels as though he is being pulled into a different reality, a twisted version of the world he thought he knew. When he opens his eyes, he sees the world around him bathed in a sickly green light, and the people around him are no longer the happy and content individuals he thought they were. Instead, he sees that they are all writhing and contorting in a state of frenzied madness, their faces twisted into grotesque expressions of terror and pain. Grayson realizes that the cult's magic has been using this artifact to mask the true nature of society, making it appear to be a utopia of peace and harmony. However, the reality is far different, and the people are all living in a state of collective madness kept in check only by the cult's dark magic. Grayson's hands tremble as he wraps the statue in a cloth and carefully tucks it into his pack. He can feel the weight of its power pulsating against his back as he turns to leave the chamber. As he makes his way back through the city, he notices something strange. The beings that had attacked his mind are nowhere to be found. In their absence, the city seems to crumble and decay, as if their presence was what was holding it together. Grayson moves quickly, feeling as though he is being watched by unseen eyes. He knows he must make his way out of the city and back to the surface as soon as possible. As he emerges from the entrance, he takes one last look back at the crumbling ruins and the eerie silence that now pervades the underground city. He can't help but wonder what other ancient horrors might still lie beneath the earth, waiting to be discovered by those who are brave or foolish enough to seek them out. Grayson rushes back to the airport and hops on a sleek silver hoverplane. The vehicle hums to life and smoothly lifts off the ground, soaring up into the sky. The cockpit is streamlined, with a panoramic view of the city below. Grayson watches as the gleaming metropolis stretches out before him, with towering skyscrapers and sprawling green parks. As he approaches his home, he can see the spires of the museum where he works, rising up above the other building. As Grayson soars over the utopian city, he is hit by a wave of horror and despair. The buildings that once seemed majestic and beautiful now appear twisted and gnarled, with faces etched into the stone that scream in agony. The people below him are not peaceful and content as he once thought, but instead are writhing and convulsing on the ground, their eyes wide with terror and their mouths open in silent screams. In the distance he sees a great rift in the sky, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, and from it pulls forth an unending stream of writhing, malevolent creatures that pour into the city and begin to feed on the terrified masses. Grayson realizes that the ancient magic that once brought unity and peace to the world was actually a pact with the ancient and malevolent beings from beyond the stars, and that the price for their aid was the sacrifice of the collective sanity of humanity. The hoverplane descends smoothly, touching down on a landing pad near the entrance of the museum. Grayson steps out, his pack containing the artifacts slung over his shoulder, and makes his way inside with a sense of unmatched fear and urgency. Grayson enters his museum, but the sight that greets him is far from the tranquil and ordered display of ancient artifacts that it once was. Instead, he sees a twisted, chaotic menagerie of unspeakable horrors. The artifacts that were once displayed as mere curiosities are now revealed to be grim talismans of an ancient, unspeakable power. The walls and displays are covered in grotesque, writhing images of the great old ones and their nightmarish minions, all rendered in an unholy combination of ancient hieroglyphs and modern graphic design. The air is thick with a palpable aura of madness, as if the entire museum were alive with some unseen malevolent force. Grayson knows that he cannot let his madness continue to affect the world, and he must find a way to contain it before it's too late. Grayson stumbled upon an old tome while searching through his collection, which he initially thought to be a history book from the 20th century. But as he started to read through it, he realized that it was the dreaded Necronomicon, a book of unspeakable horrors and ancient secrets. He began to read about Xalenthia, the great old one that had become too powerful and was imprisoned by the other great old ones. However, as he reached the end of the book, he realized that there were pages missing. His curiosity piqued, Grayson searched through his collection and eventually stumbled upon a box of lost pages of the Necronomicon that had been torn out eons earlier. As he began to read through them, he discovered that they contained descriptions of Xalenthia's terrible powers and how it had once ruled over the land with an iron grip, demanding tribute and sacrifice from its subjects. The pages also contained warnings about the consequences of releasing Xalenthia from its prison, as it would surely seek revenge on those who had imprisoned it. Grayson realized that the ancient cult he had discovered was somehow connected to Xalenthia and had been using the magic it provided to keep the Great One imprisoned and prevent its return. But at what cost had this been achieved? The museum's walls seemed to echo with the screams of those who had suffered under the cult's brutal regime. Grayson becomes aware of the fact that the great old ones who imprisoned Xalenthia were responsible for the madness and torture of humanity, and he realized that they had merely exchanged one form of tyranny for another. In his mind, he forms a plan to free Xalenthia and end the reign of chaos and madness over the world. even if it meant aligning with a powerful and potentially dangerous entity. He reasons that the prospect of Xalenthia requiring loyalty and sacrifices of her own was better than the terrible fate that had befallen humanity under the Old One's rule. He resolves to find the means to summon and free Xalenthia no matter what the cost. As Grayson delves deeper into his plan to release Xalenthia, he finds his mind slipping in and out of madness. The whispers of the ancient language he had heard in the Cyclopean city echo in his mind, and he begins to see hallucinations of the creatures that had attacked him. He struggles to maintain his grip on reality, to remind himself that he is doing this for the greater good. To ground himself, he sets up a daily routine of meditation and exercise, focusing his mind and body. He studies the Necronomicon and the lost pages he discovered in the museum, trying to understand the power and the risks involved in releasing Xalenthia. He spends time with his loved ones, reminding himself of what he is fighting for and what he is trying to save. Grayson's loved ones, once so peaceful and content, were now twisted and maddened by the ancient magic that had taken hold of the world. Their eyes gleamed with a frenzied light, their movements jerky and erratic, and their speech was a garbled mix of languages and gibberish. They were no longer themselves, no longer the people that he had known and loved, but merely vessels for the collective madness that had overtaken the world. Seeing them in such a state filled Grayson with a fierce determination to end the madness once and for all, no matter what the cost. Despite his efforts, Grayson's sanity continued to slip. He becomes more reckless, taking more risks in his search for the means to release Xalenthia. He becomes paranoid, seeing threats and dangers where there are none. But even as he teeters on the brink of madness himself, he never loses sight of his goal. Grayson's mind was now consumed with the idea of freeing Xalenthia, but he knew he needed to proceed with caution. He retrieved the lost pages from the Necronomicon and studied them closely, realizing that they were only a small part of a larger, far more ancient tome. He scoured the museum's archives and storage rooms until he finally found the book he was looking for, a tome that was so old and so powerful that it made the Necronomicon seem like a children's storybook in comparison. As he read through the pages of the ancient tome, Grayson felt a strange sensation that in the back of his mind, almost as if something was calling out to him. He tried to resist the pull, but it was too strong. He had to find a way to free Xalenthia, no matter what the cost. The tome describes Xalenthia.
Xalenthia is older and more powerful than the other great old ones, and her powers are beyond comprehension. She has the ability to manipulate reality itself, warping time and space to suit her whims. She can also bend the minds of lesser beings to her will, driving them to madness or servitude. Her mere presence can cause earthquakes, tsunamis, and other natural disasters, and she is immune to almost all forms of physical harm.
It went on to describe her physical attributes with horrific images which seemed to be illustrated in dried blood, the thought of which made Grayson shudder with unimaginable horror and question the sanity of his own intentions.
Xalenthia appears as a massive swirling mass of inky blackness that seems to absorb all light and sound. Her form is constantly shifting and changing with tendrils of darkness reaching out to ensnare and consume anything that crosses her path. Her presence is overwhelming, and those who gaze upon her are filled with a sense of unease and terror.
The ritual laid out in the book was complex and dangerous, requiring rare and dangerous ingredients that were nearly impossible to obtain. Grayson knew that he was taking a huge risk, but he was desperate to end the madness and torture that had consumed his world. He began to gather the necessary components, traveling to far-off lands and dealing with unsavory characters in order to get what he needed. The dreaded Necronomicon provided the instructions for conjuring and releasing the Great Old Ones, and though written in a language that Grayson had no formal education, somehow he was able to clearly read the instructions.
Draw a circle on the ground with a mixture of salt and ground bones representing the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of the elder gods. Light black candles at the 4 cardinal points of the circle, invoking the names of the 4 great old ones who guard the gates of the abyss: Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, and Azathoth. Chant the following incantation while holding the sacrificial blade. By the blood of the innocent and the souls of the damned, by the darkened skies and writhing blackness, by the ancient ones who slumber beneath the earth, I call upon thee, great old ones, to heed my call. Sacrifice a living creature within the circle, offering its life force as a conduit of the energies of the elder gods. Sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on the ground and recite the following words. By the power of the ancient ones and the forces of the abyss, I unbind the seals that hold thee captive. I summon thee forth from thy eternal slumber to revel in thy glory and reign supreme over all. The initiate must then lie down within the circle and allow the energies of the elder gods to enter their body, filling them with the power and knowledge of the ancient ones.
And the terrible, unnamed book of Xalenthia provided the specific ingredients needed to release the powerful old wand and the chant.
Xalenthia, Ferneglui, Migla Wanafal, Nefal Fatagan, Yulana Jai Cthulhu Fatagan, La, Xalenthia.
As he worked on the ritual, Grayson's mind began to slip farther and farther into madness. The images of his loved ones, twisted and tortured by the ancient magic, haunted him day and night, but he forced himself to keep going, knowing that the fate of the world rested on his shoulders. Finally, after weeks of preparation, the night of the ritual arrived. Grayson made his way to the location where Xalenthia was imprisoned, his mind teetering on the brink of insanity. He recited the ancient chant, the words flowing from his lips like poison, and the ground began to shake beneath his feet. As the ritual progressed, Grayson felt the presence of Xalenthia growing stronger and stronger. He knew that he had unleashed a being of immense power and that there would be consequences for his actions, but in that moment he didn't care. All he wanted was to see the madness that had consumed his world to come to an end. In the end, Grayson had successfully freed Xalenthia from her prison. The great old one emerged from the depths of the earth, her eyes burning with the fierce, ancient power. She looked down at Grayson, and for a moment he was afraid. But then she spoke, and her voice was like thunder. His mind turned in on itself, and reality seemed to split yet again for the archaeologist. "You have done well, mortal," she said. "Your world has suffered long enough under the rule of the great old ones. I will take my revenge on them, and in return, I will offer you my protection. And with that, Xalenthia disappeared, leaving Grayson standing alone in the darkness. He knew that the world would never be the same again, but for the first time in a long time he felt a glimmer of hope. In the end, Grayson was able to put an end to the cult's practices and bring their secrets to light, but he also realized that the legacy of the great old ones was still very much alive in the world. The ancient beings had left their mark on human histories in ways that could never be fully understood, and their influence would continue to shape the world for centuries to come. Darian Grayson, however, would have an eternity in darkness to consider the horrors of the past and what he may have unleashed onto the future. Darian Grayson was a man of many contradictions.